I'm Alexis Schwerha with Campus Reform. Today I'm very excited to talk to Turning Point host of Frontlines, Drew Hernandez. Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome. Thank you guys for being here too.
Yeah, of course. So I want to talk a little bit about your work as an investigative reporter. First, for our viewers, can you talk about how you got into conservative media?
Well, I would say post 2016 and kind of like the advent of President Trump, I just saw as a Christian that I wanted to kind of get more engaged and more involved with my faith and my values because I saw that we almost lost the country to, Hillary Clinton at the time, which is pretty much what I think President Biden is doing now is what she was going to do at that time. So it moved me to want to engage a little more. So around 2018 is when I started my YouTube channel. I started doing man on the street stuff, very similar to Campus Reform, debating leftists, having conversations, not like gotcha moments, but just really challenging what these people believe at protests and universities. Had some viral footage on like Instagram and YouTube. But once I started to really get engaged with independent media, conservative media, just even engaging the mainstream fake news media, was after the death of George Floyd. And CNN, fake news media outlets started to spin the riots that were actual, just mayhem and destruction and arson and looting. They were calling them protests. And I was in Southern California at the time, and they were rioting and looting in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills. And so me and a friend just went down there. I mean, we were already kind of like influencers and content creators, but I wanted to go down there and see this stuff for myself because it was shocking. This is American history. And sure enough, it was like being in a movie, like on a movie set, like Universal Studios. There's just cars turned over, they're burning them, setting them on fire, mass looting everywhere on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, and Santa Monica, the same thing. And I just started recording it. Just pulled my phone out, started recording it, documenting it on Twitter. Made some trips, if you guys remember Chaz in Seattle, the autonomous zone. Eventually started covering the riots in Portland during 2020, and I just kind of jumped into it, and it became a thing, like on the ground, videographic, just journalism, just reporting it, posting it on Twitter in real time. So that's kind of how I got thrown into like engaging the mainstream media. That's how I ended up getting on like, Tucker Carlson with Fox and doing hits like that. So I just kind of fell into it. I had the desire to engage the culture with my values, and I just kind of fell into the position of like a independent, videographic reporter, and obviously now with Frontlines I'm hosting and doing my own podcast as well. So that's just the short condensed version as to how I kind of fell into this whole thing.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you brought up all the protests that you cover. And like you said, you covered a lot of different protests. Do you notice the trend among all of the groups that you go down and videotape?
I would say the trend is a lot of mental illness. And I'm serious about that. People have lost their minds. And I would say when I was covering protests during the Trump's 4 years in his presidency from like 2016 to 2019 before the riots, it was actually safer to be out on the ground. Like I could actually go out and have conversations with some of these people, and they wouldn't most likely get violent with me. Like they would scream and get in my face, but towards the end when the riots started, that's when things started getting like even worse, like extremely violent. So I think there's this mixture where mental illness has been normalized in our society, where we don't want to address someone's mental illness. I mean, even if we talk about, how these people believe that the best women nowadays are biological men. It's mental illness, but if you say anything, you get canceled, you get silenced, you get oppressed and censored. So these people just go forward and they say, let's not tell the truth because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. So we've normalized mental illness in this country. And then the violence comes in where we've removed all morality, where there is no right and wrong with these people. Relativism has been made normal on our universities and campuses as well. So it's like this cocktail of madness where society is just unhinged. So I would say post 2020, that went into like overdrive, and then the lockdown just made things even worse. And that's kind of when the riots just exploded on the scene, and that's when I was covering them. So I would say the protest scene itself right now is dangerous. I mean, if I go out there to a protest right now, when I was in Washington, D.C. covering the overturn of Roe v. Wade stuff, always got to watch my back, especially after the Rittenhouse trial when I testified and went and spoke the truth. The death threats got worse. The threats against my life and my family got worse. And I'm just a journalist. I don't consider myself a political activist. I think I'm a journalist first. But just telling the truth and exposing these people, they get violent. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just in these short 6 years, 5 to 6 years, the protest scene was kind of, yes, it was crazy. These people have lost their minds, but you could have conversations. You don't have to fear getting physically assaulted because you believe in something different. I would say now, at least for me, that's like on high alert. If I tried doing the same thing I used to do in 2018, right now at a protest, not a riot, at a protest.
And here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, a lot of our campus correspondents who are currently college students, they're covering the protests and sometimes the riots that are happening on their college campuses. So do you think that colleges actually play a role in what you're seeing in protests on the street?
100%. I think, how do you think Antifa, okay, they're not really anti-fascists, they're neo-Marxist communists. Black Lives Matter is a neo-Marxist organization. Where do you think all these people get indoctrinated, right? I mean, I would say this has been happening on university campuses for decades. For decades, the subversion of American culture and society and our foundational values of patriotism, that war, that information war, that ideological war is taking place, has been taking place for decades on our universities. I don't even call them universities anymore. I don't even call them colleges. These are indoctrination camps. That's what they are. And that happened over time. That happened over a few decades, where now we're seeing these destructive ideas come to fruition, where this generation is now going into corporate America. They're going into Disney. They're going into the music industry. They're going into politics, obviously. They're going into all these different spheres of society, and that's when you get into cultural Marxism, because that's intentional to invade it and overtake it. I think now we're starting to see it. I mean, Black Lives Matter went mainstream. You saw it all over the NBA. You saw the communist fist just went mainstream on all of these woke corporations, including Disney, and the list goes on. So I would say, yes, these ideas are being hatched. They're old doctrines of demons that are not new. It's just been repackaged behind a name like Black Lives Matter, to where if you speak out against it, you're a racist. What, you don't care about black people? Well, they're a communist organization that hates the West and America. Antifa literally calls for the destruction of America, just like terrorist Iran does, okay? So these ideologies are being pumped into the minds of millions of young Americans, and then they go and live it out in corporate America or the real world.
And my final question for you, what advice do you have for students who want to go into investigative journalism?
I would say count the cost, because things are not the same they used to be. Back in the day, you can be an investigative journalist or just a journalist or a reporter and just want to seek a good story. Now there's the risk of getting canceled, your career being destroyed, maybe even blackmailed, censored, and the federal government coming after you. I mean, right now we've seen organizations like Project Veritas be targeted by the FBI, okay, just for being and doing journalism. So I would say right now, we're talking about some destructive ideologies that have ruined societies, that have ruined countries. Communist ideologies that have taken down Cuba, that have taken down Venezuela, that have taken down communist Russia, the USSR. So what I'm saying is, if you take a look at how the media was dealt with in those regimes, there was no media. It was engineered media. You were going up against installed, pre-approved narrative by the state. That is what we're facing right now. So as a journalist, you need to count that cost. That we're dealing with a regime right now, the DOJ. If you come after them, if you expose them in any way, if somehow you expose Hunter Biden, the laptop comes out, you just simply put out the story. Who comes knocking on your door? The FBI, right? The Biden diary comes out, ends up landing in journalists' lap. You just put out the story. Who comes after you? The FBI. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. So I always encourage people, yes, follow your dreams, follow God, he'll make it happen. But like Jesus said, count the cost. Because a lot of people try getting in this industry and their lives get destroyed and they're on the verge of being canceled and losing everything, especially on social media, and they're freaking out as to how and why could this happen. You can have that ambitious drive to want to do it, but when you start getting attacked and you're literally over the target and there's bombs and lies falling all over you, do not start crying and second guessing yourself as to why did I do this. I just encourage people to literally count that cost, because that's what we're dealing with. We are facing the same regimes and those ideas right now when it comes to media. That's just one lane of it.
Absolutely. Well, Drew, thank you so much for your time.